Welcome back to Hardware Unavailable for part 3 of the February Q&A. I have Tim here. I am Monitor Steve. Tim is... Is it that way?
No, other way.
Tim is there.
Yeah, that's right. That's good.
And we are here to answer some questions from our lovely Patreon members. So, well, actually, Patreon and Floatplane.
Yep.
So, it's from the Discord server. I'm confusing myself. It's best that we just jump straight into this before I get more confused.
All right, first question. Have you been able to verify high temperatures with the Ryzen 5800X? There are quite a few threads about how the 5800X hits higher voltages and temperatures running at the same frequency as the 5600X. And in general, quite a few people are concerned about the high temperatures on the 5800X. So, yeah, what have you been able to find?
Well, I haven't looked into it. I can't say I've noticed anything. My 5800X seems to run perfectly fine. I haven't, as I said, I haven't really gone looking for any potential problems, but certainly very stable, no dramas to speak of. The 5800X does use like 30% more power than the 5600X, so the fact that it runs hotter, not really a surprise to me.
Yep.
Without any further sort of context as to how high they are running in terms of temperatures or voltages, the voltage thing can be a bit misleading. It's really hard to accurately measure voltages. You can get all kinds of readouts that aren't necessarily accurate, which makes stuff like VRM thermal testing a whole lot of fun. But as for high temperatures, yeah, not sure how high we're talking. I'm also not sure what cooler we're using and stuff like that. So I would have to have a look at it. But yeah, no issues to report on my end.
Will future graphics card launches be doomed to several months of crypto feeding frenzy? What say you? Again, we talked a little bit about this in the first couple of parts. It really does depend on the GPU itself, like whether at that price, with that architecture, it makes financial sense to use those GPUs for mining. And it's probably not as much of an issue in a supply-constrained environment where pretty much everything is going to be suitable for mining. But if you had two GPUs and they were both available, then the GPU that has better profitability is going to be more sought after for miners. So it really depends a lot on, the architecture and the product in question. Will mining be super popular on like an RTX 3060 or RTX 3050 if that product ever comes out? Again, it's really hard to say. It depends on the market at that time that product comes out. So I would expect that a lot of graphics card launches are probably going to be affected by this in the short term with the current pricing for some of these crypto coins at the moment. But again, it could be an entirely different thing. Let's say like a RX 6700 XT launches in April or something like that. Who knows what the market's going to look like then in terms of cryptocurrency and all that. So yeah, it could be hard to say.
All right, one here from our famous moderator Ibslice on Discord. I have noticed, Steve, that you have upgraded from 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3200CL14 to 32 gigabytes recently. Do you feel that 16 gigabyte doesn't really cut it anymore compared to 6 months ago, or is there another main reason? Also, not going to DDR4 3600 instead, but I am guessing that it is to avoid any compatibility issues. I'm sure most watchers will still be using 16 gigabyte and not 32 gigabyte. All right, so I'll work through this one. So, two reasons really why we moved from 16 gigabytes to 32 gigabytes. The real main reason that forced us to do that was because when I do my initial batch of CPU testing for a CPU review, we include not just gaming, but also productivity benchmarks. And you can't really run a lot of these productivity benchmarks with 16 gigabytes rather. 32 gigabytes is really the absolute minimum you want to be using with a program like Adobe Premiere, for example, or some of the code compilation benchmarks we do. You want a lot of memory for a lot of the productivity testing. So it didn't really make sense to test with 32 gigabytes there and then change the memory for the gaming setup. It's just much more easy and leaves less sort of room for error if I just have the one memory setup that I test across the board. And then we found by using 4 sticks rather than 2, you end up running them in a dual rank configuration as well, which actually improves gaming performance in a lot of instances quite substantially. Gamers Nexus did a video on that quite recently where we did a follow-up video, but it's something we discovered quite some time ago. So yeah, move to 32 gigabytes for the productivity, but also it's kind of interesting testing these boards with 4 modules instead of 2, because that's eventually how you guys will probably end up configuring them once you upgrade over time. So there's no other main reason other than that. The reason I didn't move to DDR4 3600 was because I have a whole heap of DDR4 3200 low latency. So if I'm testing a whole heap of test systems with 4 modules in each, it's easier if I've got a dozen or so of those modules rather than constantly pulling them in and out of the DIMM slots and shuffling them around different systems. Also, 3600 CL16 is really no faster than 3200 CL14, so not much of a difference there. Not really compatibility issue related, and most people probably still are using 16 gigabytes, not 32 gigabytes. In terms of performance, for like FPS and games, doesn't really matter too much if you're using 16 or 32 for the most part, as most games don't require more than 16 gigabytes of RAM, despite some opinions saying otherwise. So I think there's a few things like maybe Microsoft Flight Simulator that can benefit from 32 gigabytes, but most of the games, 16 gigabytes is really all you need. So that's that one.
With GPU shortages being what they are now, what do you think the best stopgap GPU is right now? Meaning the best card to buy that's good enough that you plan to resell as soon as you can get your hands on a nice new card. Well, unfortunately, you're kind of limited by every single graphics card you could possibly want being out of stock right now, at least if you buy new. So I think one of the like lowest tier cards, or one of the best cards you get right now is like a GT 1030, maybe if you're lucky. I think it used to be like a GT 710, but now GT 1030s are back in stock. So, yay!
Yeah, we're talking that's absolutely awful performance. You're talking like 720p
you're
sort
talking
of performance.
You're talking garbage bin tier. So
1080p low type stuff.
That's not like, I would not class a GT 1030 as a stopgap GPU. It's a low end GPU for adding into a PC that you need like minimum level GPU requirements to run like a productivity benchmark, or you need it for video encoding if the GT 1030 even has that included in it. So yeah, I would say you're probably looking at the used market, and even then, like, used market is price inflated at the moment. So again, I think we talked about previously, something like an RX 570 probably makes a fair bit of sense right now. If you're buying on the used market, sort of in that lower range where you're not going overboard and spending hundreds of dollars more. You might have to spend $20, $30, $50 more to get this low end GPU than you otherwise would have, but you're only spending like $200, $250 on a GPU. I think even a used RX 570 is lower than that. So to me, that seems like a good stopgap GPU. Again, 570s, we've talked about many times, is a perfectly capable GPU for your sort of medium setting gaming today. So seems like a good option. All right, Steve, since you were being a monitor for this Q&A, what monitor would you like to be in?
Mate, I'm a simple man. I'm happy to go with whatever Tim picks. I'm sure I'll perform well on any monitor. So
I should put
could be a smartphone, a tablet.
I'll give you either a CRT, which we can crop nicely to just your face on a nice tight shot, or how about like a portrait,
retro, Steve.
A portrait ultra wide monitor, so you can get your entire body in there. We'll have you standing.
I'll do a standing presentation.
Yeah, I think that might
whatever
work
you
well.
need. Whatever you need me to do, I'm flexible. I can pull it off.
Yeah, easy.
Question here from Nick. With Nvidia requiring a VBIOS update for resizable bar, do you think many people will end up bricking their cards like I did back in the day, flashing my 970? Sorry to hear that, Nick. I'd rather not brick my 3090. Weird flex, but okay. No, just kidding. Yeah, that's an interesting development there on Nvidia's side, that you will need to flash the BIOS on those cards to enable resizable bar support. Will many people end up bricking their cards? Hopefully they make the process really easy. I'd say the process has been made a lot easier since back in the Maxwell days. So hopefully there's just a file you run, quickly does its thing, reset the computer, and you're all good. And as long as you don't lose power or have anything go wrong with Windows, you should be fine. I know I've flashed many VBIOSes over the last year without a problem. It doesn't really take any special expertise or whatever. So yeah, I don't think there'll be too many problems. But yeah, bricking your 3090 in the current climate would be a little bit devastating, I think. It'd probably take a while to get that one back. But anyway, what do you reckon, Tim? Not much more to say on that one?
Well, I guess if it's an official Nvidia VBIOS update, like obviously you have to go through the board partners as well, and you brick it when you run it, can you claim that on warranty? Is that like...
Yeah, that'd be a warranty thing for sure.
Yeah, so you wouldn't have to. It's not like you would brick your 3090 and then you just have to throw that in the bin. But
No.
Yeah, you'd send it back.
No.
Yeah, that's why I would assume it would work. So it should be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I don't know if Nick was implying that, but absolutely, this will be handled by the AIBs. The AIBs will have their various different ways of rolling out that update to their customers. But if something unfortunate happens, like you do lose power or the system crashes during the VBIOS update, you reset and then it's no good. Hopefully, most 3090s would have a secondary BIOS, so you could just flick over to that. I don't know if there's any 3090s that don't have one. Maybe there's an MSI card that I'm aware of. Anyway,
FE model?
Hopefully they've got a... Yeah, I don't think the FE model does, actually. So...
Yeah, the FE model's in my system. I don't think it has dual BIOS.
Yeah. So hopefully your 3090 has a dual BIOS, because that's why we push heavily for dual BIOS support, because you can really get yourself out of trouble with that. But anyway, yeah, if you do happen to brick it, that'll just be a warranty thing. But that's what I was getting at, like... Well, if you send the card back, they can quickly reflash it for you, so it's not like they'd have to provide a new card. So really, it shouldn't matter. It'll just be a bit of inconvenience sending the card off, waiting for it to come back. It'll be a week or two delay, probably, depending on how things are handled in your region.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think it's something that most of you will have to worry about. Tim, now that Stadia is shutting down its own studios, any thoughts on what that means for the future of PC gaming?
So does Stadia, did it have any impact on PC gaming at all? Like, did anyone use it?
Yeah, I think it's meant to be a bit of a meme question. Not sure on that one. Well, we'll move on to the next one. Apparently miners now started mining on laptops. Any thoughts on what that means for the future of PC gaming?
Future of PC gaming. There's so many questions about what this future is going to look like. Look, I think the future looks like a desolate wasteland. That's what all this stuff's telling me. Stadia shutting down studios, miners mining on laptops. I mean,
it's game over.
I don't know. All I can see is like lava flowing out of my PC onto my carpet. I mean, it just does not look good for future of PC gaming. So, yeah, hopefully they stop mining. Hopefully they stop mining on laptops. Hopefully Stadia. I don't know. I don't even care about Stadia at all. Like I said, does anyone even use Stadia?
Maybe Stadia is now going to be mining on laptops.
Yeah, that's what we need. We need a way to mine cryptocurrency on Stadia so that people don't have to mine on regular GPUs. That would be a revolutionary thing that we could do. So someone should get on that.
He might have just made Stadia useful, Tim. Question here from Luca. I've been following your AIB card reviews for the Radeon 6800 XT. I've noticed they're all been very high quality. Well, thank you. I don't know if he's talking about my reviews there or the AIB cards. We'll find out in a minute. Do you think this is attributable to criticism with the 5000 series Radeon being competitive at the top end or having actual decent reference coolers for once? Okay, so I don't think he's talking about my reviews being high quality.
Oh, devastating.
But yeah, I think they've probably, a lot of the AIBs, especially like take Asus for example, aren't super looking forward to the kind of criticism or aren't wanting to repeat what they saw with the 5000 series of cards. So yeah, I'd say there was a bit of a internal discussion about what happened there, what went wrong, and they made sure that they really nailed the Radeon 6800 series, the initial Radeon RDNA 2 series. So I think that's a fair assessment.
Next question. Has complaining about GPU availability become the internet's new correct AIO radiator orientation? I see comments complaining about unicorn GPUs and no Zen 3 stock, and here I am using a Discord bot to buy 4 3080s for friends in less than a month. Do you think people need to wake up and realize it's 2021 and bots are the new midnight launch events? Well, I think complaining about GPU availability is pretty fair if you can't go on a regular retailer and buy it in a normal way. At the same time, I think there's, bots are bad if you're using them to buy them as for a scalper or whatever. But if you really want to be among the first people to buy a product, then, and you're using it for your own personal use, then yeah, using a bot, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that people will probably become more accustomed to using them. I mean, like eBay, auctions, for example, they've been used on there for ages and ages and ages to, make sure your winning bid gets in at the very last millisecond that auction is available. And it just seems like that sort of thing is happening more with retailers, until retailers block bots, which might happen. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with complaining about availability. I think it's perfectly legitimate criticism based on what we're seeing at the same time. But at the same time, if you're using a Discord bot and you're able to buy 3080s for yourself and your friends, yeah, all the power to you. And if that continues to be a way that people are finding success getting these things, then they'll continue being a thing. Do you have any strong thoughts on using bots to buy these things either way?
I don't have any real strong thoughts on the bot part for personal use. And I totally agree with you that, yeah, GPU availability's bad, so I don't have a problem with people complaining about that. And the same for Zen 3 stock to a degree. There are certain Zen 3 processors that have had good stock levels and other ones that basically don't exist. So, yeah, that's the situation we face right now, but not too much more to say on that one.
Next question. Tim, any thoughts on the NZXT H1 issues? I feel like you're pretty well positioned to have a good idea of what's going on and the long-term effect of this one. I think this is probably coming from a perspective that this person knows that I have an engineering degree, which is probably something I don't talk about too much, but I think our Discord members are familiar with it. So first of all, I'll say, well, I haven't actually worked as an engineer in my life. So I have an engineering degree, but I'm not an engineer. I'm a YouTuber. I make product reviews. So let's get that out the way
plenty of
first.
content.
Yeah, I've engineered plenty of content. That's a good way of saying it. So yeah, I was very interested in the NZXT H1 issue that you would have seen on Games Nexus channel, pointing out the fire hazard that product is producing. If you haven't watched that series of videos, go and watch it. It's very interesting. But the basics of it is that inside the PCIe riser assembly in the PCB, they had put a 12 volt or 5 volt, can't quite remember, let's say 12 volt power plane throughout the entire PCB, and then just screwed a hole straight through it that would mount that to the case. And then the case being grounded, eventually, if you wear enough of the hole out with a screw, that 12 volt plane would then get shorted to ground, causing a fire, causing the whole thing to melt. Not a good situation, definitely needs to be fixed. And I find it very surprising because when you're designing PCBs using the industry standard PCB designing tools, and I haven't used all of them, but I have used a few of them to make my own PCBs, it's virtually impossible to do this. Like, you cannot just put a hole, like you can't just make a power plane and then put a hole through it. The application will throw you a ton of errors, because usually when you start putting a hole through it, or you're putting wires through or whatever, there's all sorts of design rules around that. So when you set up making a PCB in the software, usually there's like a default set of rules that you want to put in. Like, for example, you don't want to have two wires right next to each other because they might short to each other. So there's a rule of like how close you can put the wires together. There's a rule of when you put a hole through the board for mounting, how much clearance there is so that you don't have any ground planes, you don't have any wires running through there. And if there's any of that happening, it throws up errors, so that when you try and export your design to be printed, that it gives you all the errors. You can see exactly what's going on. So it sounds like there's been some pretty incompetent engineering going on. Like, for example, designing the board without putting the mounting hole in the software, sending it for printing, and then drilling the hole in like after the fact without any sort of like consideration for what the PCB actually looks like, which is a very odd way to do things. It's certainly not, I think they talked about this in the Gamers Nexus video, but it's certainly not a way that most people design products. Like, it's just not, it's not generally possible. Most people designing PCBs know better. It's a very basic thing to get wrong. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know exactly what went on there. Again, my assumption is that they made the PCB, or they were repurposing this PCB from something else to use for this design. Some guy thought, hey, we can put a screw hole right there, did it without thinking, and they've kind of run themselves into this problem. But they'll learn a lesson, and hopefully they'll actually put their holes in the PCB design tools that they use for once, because yeah, that really shouldn't happen.
Okay, as content creators, engineering content, Tim, are you guys worried about running out of topics to talk about in the following months, given the current mainstream hardware market situation? We're certainly not worried about running out of stuff to talk about, because I know myself personally, and probably Tim as well, we have like a list that's longer than I can fit on the webcam of just ideas and things we want to get to. I was meant to be taking a break next week. Hopefully I'll still be able to, but a few benchmark discoveries have come up and things I really want to investigate. So I'm madly trying to get all that done. When I come back, there's a whole heap of work waiting for me. So we've got plenty of stuff to do. I think the problem at the moment, I don't know if we're so much worried about it, but it's annoying, is the same thing that's annoying you guys. Like, you guys aren't interested in a lot of the content that we would normally be making. So we're sort of shifting to other things, or we're juggling what we're doing, just making it a lot less fun. Like, I would have loved to right now. I've done a massive, you know, RX 6800 and 6800 XT card roundup, and a massive, you know, RTX 3060 Ti, 3070 Ti, like done all these graphics card roundups to see if there's any cards that suck or if there's any standouts and stuff like that. Those roundups are always interesting, but I haven't been able to justify reviewing so many of those products to then lead to a roundup. So there'll be no roundups of any of these current generation GPUs. So that's a bit disappointing. And yeah, just basically the lack of enthusiasm for a lot of the content sort of kills our enthusiasm for making it, because obviously we're making it for you guys who enjoy it and want to see that stuff. And if you don't enjoy it and want to see it, then not much point doing it.
Yeah, and obviously there's all the YouTube algorithm implications as well. Like, if you guys aren't watching as many of the other videos, then videos that you are interested in, obviously they will get seen by some people, but probably wouldn't have the same reach that they otherwise would have. That's just kind of the effect of this, which, yeah, happens from time to time. It's certainly not the first time it's happened for us on the channel. It's happened probably a couple of times in the past. But yeah, I think, yeah, in terms of running out of topics, it's definitely not going to happen. There's kind of sort of two modes that we get into with making content. There's like the release mode. So when the products have just freshly come out, like say September and October of last year, then a lot of the content you'll see is around those products. And then it sort of gets into the off-season content, where we sort of switch to doing like more comparisons, more sort of your evergreen content that really you could make at any time in the year. Like, one example could be, you know, how much RAM you need for gaming. Like, that content, it doesn't really need to be made at any specific time. It could be made at any point. So that's kind of the content that you would expect to see in this sort of situation, is more sort of those investigations, things that are just interesting topics, things that, you know, don't rely on us testing the latest and greatest hardware. So it could be, you know, revisits of old GPUs, which is something that we tend, or at least you tend to do in sort of those off-season periods. Normally we'd like to do build videos as well. Obviously that doesn't make a lot of sense at the moment, but that's kind of a traditional thing that we've done in the off-seasons as well. So yeah, all those things, yeah, there's plenty of content. There's plenty of monitor testing that will continue, because monitors are thankfully not as affected as the other product categories. So yeah, there's still plenty of stuff to talk about, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Like the RAM example that you gave is a good one. That's something I haven't had time to do for like, I think 3 years now. Yep. So I'd like to get a chance to do an updated version of that. So as I said, we have massive lists of content ideas that we're, a lot of them we're really keen to do. We just, every time we almost get to it, a new product cycle starts, and away we go.
All right, final question for this month's Q&A. As of January 2021, so I think this might have been a question right at the end of last month, what games do you feel are the top 5 most demanding games on a GPU and CPU, and actually have visuals to warrant the high system requirements? So I think finding 5 is probably going to be fairly difficult, but I'll slot in 2 right off the bat. 2 really obvious ones. Cyberpunk 2077 and Microsoft Flight Simulator are probably the 2 most demanding games with excellent visuals I can think of right now. Yeah, what other ones? You do a lot of game testing. I mean, we both do.
Yeah, I mean, for that stress both the GPU and CPU is sort of their rare titles. Like Horizon Zero Dawn is very hard on the GPU, not super hard on the CPU. One of the better games for CPU and GPU testing, which we still use to this day, is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Getting quite old now, but the village section that we test, obviously quite GPU demanding, especially with the highest quality settings, but very CPU intensive. Surprisingly so, much more so than a lot of games that have been released since. So Shadow of the Tomb Raider is great for testing CPU performance, which is why I often use it. Like games like Hitman can be quite good, but the Hitman engine's always a bit strange as well. The bottlenecks that occur in that one are a bit strange, so not the greatest one for testing, but yeah, in the NPC heavy areas, quite CPU intensive. I don't know if it's really a very visually demanding game. It certainly looks decent.
If you're talking about like being demanding on the CPU and having visuals that clearly use a lot of CPU resources, I think Hitman probably is a pretty good example, because there are a lot of NPCs on the screen in some of those scenes, which is very CPU demanding. So from that perspective, it doesn't have the most stunning visuals graphically, but certainly in terms of what they're doing with NPCs and those environments, I'd say that probably counts. I mean, if I think about the games I've played over the last like year or so, I think maybe like a Watch Dogs Legion would have to be up there in terms of visuals. I mean, it does depend on the scene that you're playing. I think it's much more visually impressive at night than it is during the day. And then like Assassin's Creed Odyssey as well. It's much more impressive in parts of England than it is in the opening section of the game. And that both those games are quite demanding on current hardware.
I'd say like Red Dead Redemption 2 would be another one.
I think Red Dead Redemption 2 still holds up today. So if you're probably still talking about a game that's very demanding visually, even though it was released in 2019 for PC, then yeah, I think that one still counts as a very demanding game. All right, and that does it for our February Q&A series. Another 3 parts down. As we talked about in one of the previous episodes, I'm really enjoying doing these Q&As at the moment, sort of keeping my interest in this whole PC scene alive, because testing products that you can't buy is kind of a little bit depressing at times. But yeah, it's great to hear that people are sort of still a bit interested in our videos and want to know our thoughts on at least some things. So yeah, it's been a lot of good fun, a lot of good questions. It's good to get Monitor Steve back in action after a couple of months of, yeah, the monitor sort of situation being a bit dormant. But yeah, I imagine we'll be, fingers crossed, back in person for next month's Q&A series. Just a temporary lockdown here in Victoria. I think we've been very lucky with our pandemic situation overall in Australia, so can't complain too much about the sort of times that we have to do this. It's been a pretty good setup for us. And yeah, subscribe to the channel, give the video a like if you enjoyed it, dislike it if you're a heathen. And what else is going on, Steve? Anything else we should talk about at the end?
Not really. We'll have more content coming up, big benchmark videos, monitor testing, all the usual stuff to come before we get to the Q&As next month. So yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.